Skinny, we'll start with the Joe Mixon trial. It's been going on this week. He was on trial for aggravated menacing after a road rage incident. He was alleged to have pointed a gun at a woman. They shouted some things at each other, allegedly. We just found out seconds before starting this podcast that he was found not guilty. What do you make of this whole Joe Mixon trial and what happens now for he and the Bengals?
Don't forget, he's also got the civil suit against him from the folks in the Anderson Township incident, so that's still hanging out there. It was certainly longer than what everybody thought it was going to be. I think initially everybody thought it was a quick one-day thing, and that's all he would miss. I mean, he missed all of this week of practice, and while in the surface it's not a big deal, it's really not. I know some people want to make a big deal of it. From that regard, it's not. But at the end of the day, he's found not guilty. You can believe what you want to believe. I'm not even going to say what I want to believe or what I believe in this case. I just know what the court found and what the judge found. She found him not guilty. I don't think any more of Joe Mixon than I ever did. He's just a football player who's got some issues, and I know Bengals fans love him, and that's your prerogative to love him all you want. But as far as the football side of things goes, he's still back in the fold, but I will remind people that the NFL can still come in and suspend him. There's no court of law with the NFL. If they think that his conduct is outside the conduct policy, they can certainly hand him a suspension. I truly thought that if he was found not guilty, that probably wouldn't take place, depending on what happens with the civil suit eventually. And I still think that way. I think if he was found guilty, I do think that the NFL would have suspended him for, a handful of games, whatever that might be, 2, 3, or 4. So I think in that regard, if you're expecting Joe Mixon or hoping Joe Mixon wouldn't miss any time, I think you're probably going to be happy as a Bengals fan. I don't think he's going to miss time. And again, from a practice perspective, would it be nice to have him in the fold and have all your players there? It sure would. But I don't think it's a big deal that he missed 2 practices in a week, especially when they have no contact. And he's not going to play in the Friday game against Atlanta. Wasn't going to play in the Friday game against Atlanta anyway. So really, what did he really miss?
Yeah, it's kind of been a weird thing to follow this because, like you said, there's a lot of people who are concerned and focused on, will Joe Mixon miss time? Will he be suspended? That type of thing in the football aspect of it. And I hear a lot of people being like, it's not really that big of a deal. Even if he was guilty, he's not going to jail or anything. It's just going to be a situation where he probably has a fine. And I don't know if you do community service or what you do to get out of that. But it wasn't going to be that big of a deal. And I get that, I guess. But I'm also wondering, it seems like a lot of people are overlooking how absurd it is for Joe Mixon to allegedly be pointing a gun out the car window. It wasn't this like the same weekend as they played the Bills in the playoffs too? Isn't that when this happened?
It was the same day. It was the same day they were leaving to go play Buffalo.
Right. So
it was on the way to the stadium.
Isn't that just a little bit absurd and crazy to begin with? And it also makes me wonder if the NFL doesn't look at that, because if you followed the trial at all, it seemed like the defense, Mixon's attorney, was focused way more on proving that the woman was not scared.
Correct.
To avoid the aggravated menacing charge, and not about denying that Mixon did wave a gun out the window and say he might cap her or whatever he said. So, I mean,
I think the biggest issue, Rick, was they never proved there was a gun at all. I think that's the biggest problem here. They never showed it. I honestly thought they would have had some kind of video of at least something that looked like a gun or him pointing something out a window, and they really didn't. I mean, the prosecution really didn't have a very strong case here. Again, you can think what you want. I know what I think, whether he did it or not, and I'm just going to leave it at that. But at the end of the day, the prosecution really had a weak case. The defense attorneys are scumbags for the most part. And, them pointing the finger at the woman to me is completely absurd, but they did a much better job in proving their case. And, I followed pretty intently. So did a couple other beat writer friends, and we were in a text chain back and forth. And as soon as they wrapped up closing arguments, I thought the prosecutor had a good closing argument, mind you. But at the end of the closing arguments, I literally said they're not going to find him guilty, and they didn't.
Right, and I agreed with that from everything I had seen. It seemed like, well, his side is definitely winning this. But he had gone so long in his NFL career without any rumors, at least that I had heard, at least from a public fan perspective, I think, of him acting out after he had the incident where he punched a woman at Oklahoma. I think a lot of us kind of wanted to believe the idea that, okay, Joe Mixon had become a guy that, made a really bad mistake, a terrible mistake, an unforgivable mistake, you might even think, in college, but he's moved on. He's put that past him, and he's tried to do the best he could since he's gotten to the NFL. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it's not. But after hearing about this incident, seeing this trial, it definitely leads you to believe, or at least make you wonder, well, if this is really who the guy's been the whole time, right? He's just either been getting away with it or it hasn't come to public light.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. And the Anderson Township situation doesn't help. I mean, I know he didn't pull the trigger, but it occurred at his house and may have occurred with his gun. So, that's the other part. He's not out of the woods in that case at all, because it's a civil case and not a criminal case. And civil cases, I'm not an attorney by any stretch of the imagination, but there's far less burden of proof to win that civil case. And again, I don't know if he's found guilty and has to pay some kind of fine in that case, if again the NFL swoops in and hands him a suspension.
Yeah, one thing I always wonder about these types of scenarios is, what do you think the vibe is like among teammates inside that locker room when something like this is going on with Joe Mixon? He's away from the team for practice. He's not there. Do you think the guys are like in the locker room showing each other updates on social media, like on their phones, and talking about it? Do you think they think it's weird? Do you think they're kind of gossiping behind his back a little bit, or what's that like?
That's a good question. I honestly, I mean, just being in the locker room, I didn't sense any of that. I didn't even sense them talking about the situation. I think for players, and I really mean this, they're so locked into what they have to do on a daily basis that, quite frankly, even though it might be a teammate, I don't even know if they have any level of care or focus on any of that kind of stuff, because they have to be so locked into their own world.
Well, and I also think it's a world in which there's a lot of your personal life is your personal life, and I'm just going to there's a lot of crazy stuff, right? The show ballers and things like that isn't all that far off from what's taking place when these guys are on the roads and they've got side pieces or whatever else. So a lot of these guys are probably used to kind of being like, what you got going on off the field is what you got going on off the field. I just want you to show up on Sunday and do your job. And they kind of just turn the other way and don't worry about that stuff.
I think that's exactly right.